time to look at interactionism. Now, we know that interactionism is going to be significantly different to our other theories in that it is a social action theory. So we're going away from the structural to the social action, which is going to mean here's my little man and he is going to be shaping society. Okay? It's going to be micro. It's concerned with those small scale interactions. It's concerned with society from the bottom up, and you being the person who's in charge of shaping the world and shaping the society around you. And of course, when it comes to official statistics, it's going to be rejecting their official statistics, which is quite a nice, which can make it quite a nice counter to some of the other theories. Now, what I'd start off by saying is the social construction of deviance is an idea within interactionism. Very famously, Becker is going to say, deviant behaviour is behaviour people so label. And from that quote, we can infer quite a lot. We can infer that in fact deviance is a social construct, it is made by the society around us, and we can infer that the label that is given to criminals or to criminality will have a perhaps enduring impact on that person's life and their chances of committing that act again, or of maybe internalising that act, which is why we see obviously Howard Becker and his most famous theory of labelling. So in the book Outsider, he's going to unpack this process of labelling, which from an interactionist perspective, you know, is going to start from an act, then the act gets labelled, then we see a self-fulfilling prophecy where you internalise the label, you end up with a master status, and once you've got a master status, you're embarking on a deviant career. Okay? So this is, in short, the basic process of labelling. And, you know, deviant behaviour is an act. So for our interactionists, that's where the process kind of starts. It's a big weakness of Becker and the interactionist theory. You know, it's not a structural theory. It's not going to look at the top down. It's not going to be able to tell you why this act maybe occurs in the first place, but it is going to tell you what's going to happen once that behaviour exists. Act, you know, so if this isn't my pen and I take it from somebody, that's what I've done. I have taken the pen. I have not yet stolen the pen until you give that the label of steal, and then what I've got to do is you're going to say, right, you did an act of theft there, perhaps you're a thief. I internalise that label, I act out the label of thief more and more and more, self-fulfilling prophecy until it becomes the label that everybody knows me as. Master status of thief means I can only associate with other thieves, other outsiders, as Becker would put it in his book, and that's going to lead me down a deviant career path. Now, that's going to show how the society is going to have that effect on me, because it is in those interactions here and those labels that I get and that I receive from other people that will affect my behaviour. Now, the labelling theory, just before I move on, when you consider who you could use to show this, you know, a perfect example is Jock Young and the hippies of this process of labelling. You know, we can see how it moves through the hippies from an original act of smoking drugs to the dirty, lazy, druggy label to the process where they are now kind of deviance is made worse, that they are taking heroin instead. So you can see that labelling process work through using Jock Young and the hippies. So if you're ever writing about labelling process, don't make up a process when you can give a case study of it taking place. Now, here we see something slightly different with Cicero, because for this section here, when we link to Becker's idea, we're seeing how the label affects the person who gets labelled. So if I label you, we're seeing how that affects your behaviour. Whereas for Cicero, when it comes to typifications, we're talking about the process not in reverse, but slightly different. Because Cicero is going to suggest, through his study of typifications and the negotiation of justice, remember, don't forget those, that really that the label that is held by me will affect my interactions with you. And that's certainly done in a criminal sense. The police have got a typical criminal type: young, ethnic minority, poorly educated, working class. This criminal type, they are more likely to target, they are more likely to engage with and have an encounter with, they're more likely to arrest. And then the judges are more likely to send those people down. Those who don't fit that criminal type can't negotiate their way, or can negotiate their way, out of justice more easily. Look at the case of Lavinia Woodward, female, smart, middle class, okay? So well educated, because she's at Oxford or Cambridge, I can't remember, I think it's Oxford. So, so Cicero's, not only does it show why the official statistics are not accurate because of the bias within the policing, it shows how the label that I hold affects, as a police officer or as a judge, will affect my encounter with a criminal or an offender or somebody who's accused of offences. So the label is very powerful and it works, we can see its effect here in both ways. Now, also important that I will be talking about in interactionism is Leslie Wilkins and the deviancy amplification spiral. Just get to draw a spiral on board for no reason. So the deviancy amplification spiral shows the impact of the moral entrepreneur, which is a big one. The moral entrepreneur of the media shows the media's impact in how the media can go from one act that it puts in the news to creating the moral panic, where we have our folk devils, where the deviancy gets louder and is amplified. The deviancy is made worse. And this, deviancy amplification spiral can be seen through Cohen's mods and the rockers, whereby, once we see that first fight in Clacton take place, because of the news media's impact, we end up with a bigger fight, or we end up with another fight in Brighton, with more arrests and a heightened level of panic in society. It doesn't happen, that fight in Brighton, if we don't get the press coverage of the first scrap in Clacton. So again, I'm using Wilkinson's deviancy amplification spiral to show the impact of the moral entrepreneur, the media, on crime, but I'm using Cohen's mods and rockers to be able to kind of give an example of what Wilkins is talking about when he looks at that spiral. Final ones that we probably haven't remembered, I haven't talked about this guy for a while, is Lemur. And Edwin Lemur's going to look at primary and secondary deviance. He's going to look at the impact of the reaction of society. So if you remember in his study of Native Americans, it's a study in stuttering, where in the Native American community he's looking at stuttering, public speaking is very important. Because the community places such a high regard on public speaking, as soon as we see a small child start to maybe stutter or stutters when he's talking, the reaction to that is inherently negative and like almost catastrophic. The primary deviance for Lemur is the first initial stutter. That's the first time that the norms of society are kind of broken. But the secondary deviance is the important thing that he finds in his study, because he finds that after the first act, when the reaction is terrible or when the reaction is heightened, we see the primary deviance occurring more, and that's the secondary deviance, the response to the response of society. Okay? Primary deviance is the act, then we get a response, then we get the secondary deviance, which is the response to the response. And generally, what Lemurtz will show is that when you get a higher level of response, you're going to see the criminality or the deviant behaviour increase. Now, there are lots of other writers for interactionism. You might remember Goffman and the idea of stigma, the long-lasting effects of institutional, or you being institutionalised for a period of your life, either in a prison or an asylum, or and leading back out into society, the stigma which you're left with. But mainly what we've got here is a hell of a lot of studies that you can back up with other interactionist studies to put in your essay. Obviously, there's lots of weaknesses with interactionism itself. The idea that maybe moral panics don't have any impact anymore. We can't explain what happens before the act. The Cicero's typifications. It's not, certainly not the most modern of studies. Perhaps policing styles have changed, and we've kind of got rid of that unconscious bias. But plenty of weaknesses there amongst the general ones that you could pick out for those writers. So that is interactionism, as we know, a bit of a different theory, but I think, a useful comparative one. So if you don't even get it in a 40 marker, it's a useful one to compare against, because you've got that notion of official statistics, being wrong, and the use of Cicero. He's quite a nice multi-purpose writer. So that's interactionism.